Hi, this is Dave from the Floodwood High School, and today we're working on welding. When you finish school, we were working on welding this trailer. It's a 6'6" wide by 12-foot long trailer. It'll have a 3,500 pound axle on it. And when we finished up school, you had got done tack welding everything except for the top rail. And I cut 3 of the pieces for the top rail. I got that piece, this piece, and the short one cut. I haven't cut that one there yet. But I just wanted to go through it a little bit. You were also working on cleaning up the metal. And the reason we want to clean up the metal, the steel has just, it's got a little oil coating on it. And we want to clean that up. We want to clean any rust that's on it, so when we go to paint it, the paint holds better. We're not looking to get the steel down to bare metal. That's not a real need. And it's really going to depend on what type of paint you use. We could paint this with a rattle can. We could paint it with numerous different things. I've got Sherwin-Williams is looking for a paint for us that we can use inside the school here. That's going to be a water-based one so that we don't have the school filled with the fumes from an oil-based paint for a powder-coated, but it's going to be a quality paint. So we went around it, and before I put these pieces, cut them, I went around and I just buffed them up. And you could use a grinding wheel, just a standard 4.5-inch grinding wheel on your grinder. We could have done that. You could use a wire wheel. There's a couple different kinds of wire wheels. There's a wire wheel like this one. This is another style of wire wheel. You could have used either one of those. But what I decided to use, this is a metal sanding disc for the grinder, and I went around and I used this. Like I said, I wasn't looking to get rid of everything. I wasn't trying to get down to bare metal. You can feel as you grind over it, you can feel where you have hit and where you haven't. Where you haven't hit, it's going to be a little bit rough, and once you hit it, it's going to be smooth, and it's going to remove any rust that's started to build up. And that's all I was trying to do, is to clean that up. And so I used this, like I said, it's just a 4.5-inch metal sanding disc. And another disc that you can have is, you won't use this to clean it up, but this is a 4.5-inch cutting disc for your grinder, and you could use that. I was just setting up here. We're going to cut a 1-inch radius corner here. So I don't have this piece tack welded together yet. I've got a couple magnets holding it together in place. I've got it set up flush, and I was going to tack weld in a couple spots to hold it. And then we were going to, on this sharp corner, we were going to get rid of this sharp corner, and we're going to put a 1-inch radius on it. And the way to put a 1-inch radius on it, it's real simple. Just measure in on each side. Measure from the one end in 1 inch. Measure from the other edge in 1 inch. And then where those two marks cross, that's the center of your circle. Remember, radius is half the distance of a circle. Diameter is from one side to the other. Radius is half. And then just find a simple compass. This is just a cheap, simple compass that I found here. I set that right on the point where the two 1-inch marks crossed, and then just move this, line it up with the edge, and draw your line. And you can draw with a couple things. This isn't an actual pencil. This is a welder's pencil, and you can mark steel. Most common is using a simple soapstone. And I've come to really like these welder's pencils. And the reason I like them is you can mark on them, and as you're cutting with the torch, or you're welding or grinding, anything that you're doing, this pencil doesn't go away. Whereas when you use a soapstone, a lot of times your soapstone mark will go away as you're cutting, welding, whatever you're doing. And so the pencil is really nice to use. So as I said, we're going to cut this 1-inch radius. We could use this 4.5-inch cutting disc to cut it. That would be simple to make that cut, but we're only working with 3/16 steel. So we can use just a regular grinding disc will actually cut it fairly quickly and round it. That way you can round it and smoothen it out all at the same time. But there's one thing I wanted to do before I did that. I wanted to tack these two pieces together so it becomes one. Right now I've got it clamped. This side piece I have it clamped here. I also have it clamped on the other end. And I'm just going to put a couple tacks on top and one couple underneath here and tack it in place. And once we get everything tacked in place, we're going to use the wire feed welder to tack in place, just like you guys were doing. And when we're done getting the top rail tacked in place on every spot, then we're going to start welding everything together. And we're going to use a stick welder. I lost my rod. We're going to use a stick welder to do any of the flats. We'll use a 70-18 rod. And anything that's flat, we're going to use the stick welder. Anything that's vertical, we're probably going to use a wire feed welder. And one of the biggest reasons is wire feed is easier to use. It gives you a cleaner vertical weld, and everything that's going to be vertical for the most part is going to be seen, and we have use of both of them. So we want to make sure that we're getting application of both ways. You know, it'd be everything that's especially structural. We're going to use a 70-18 rod, and we're going to weld with this. We'll have all of our 45s. We're going to weld a root bead in there, and then we'll get the slag off. We'll weld a couple more beads on top of that on our 45s. On the main frame, we'll wire feed a vertical bead up the corner. All of our cross braces will stick weld in a couple spots, and once we get everything welded together, we'll flip it over and we'll start working on the hitch and axle. And one thing when we're welding though, we don't want to start welding here and just continue all the way along. So we're going to weld one spot here, then we're going to go to the other side, then we'll move over, go over there, we'll come back over here, we'll move up to the top. We don't want to weld all in one spot, because we're going to start to, if we do, we're going to get the metal too hot and it's going to start to warp the metal, and we're going to start to have issues. So we're going to try to spread the welding out so that we're not getting too much heat into one spot. When we're using the stick welder, we're going to set it at about 120. We're welding 1/4-inch steel. We're going to set that at about 120, and we'll weld at that. With our wire feed welder, wire feeds are really nice, especially this one's really nice. There's a chart right on here, and it'll tell you. We're using 0.030 wire. We're welding steel, and if you just follow the 0.030 across there, we're welding 3/16 steel is our top rail. So 3/16 steel, we're going to set the volts at 19 and the wire speed at 290. And we'll start out there. That's just a great base place to start. And you'll know as you're welding if you have to adjust something. If you need a little bit hotter, a little bit cooler, you'll adjust the wire speed and you'll go from there. But to tack weld it, we're going to be fine to start out this. I have the gas set at a little over 20, and we should be good. So I'm just going to tack weld this one corner, and then we're going to grind this corner around, and we'll go from there. Always remember when you're welding that you have the proper tools. So you got to have a welding coat on. It's not that you have to, but if you don't, you could end up starting your clothes on fire. And some of you have seen that. You should have welding gloves, because as you're welding, this metal is going to get hot. You need to make sure you have a welding helmet. This is an auto darkening helmet, which is really nice. When I was growing up, your guys' age, we just had a helmet with the lens on it, and as you started, you had to nod your head so that your helmet came down as you started to weld. With this, it's really nice with the auto darkening. You can have your helmet down and you can see what you're going to weld before you start welding. And as soon as an arc starts, your lens automatically darkens. And you can set the sensitivity on it. You can set the darkness on it. So there's a couple different settings, but it's really nice. So I'm just going to put a couple tacks here. I just flush this up. It's all clamped together. I got just a little bit of a space in between here. And I'm just going to put a couple tacks quick. Okay, now that it's stacked together, I'm going to take and round this corner. And this you need to have safety glasses on. So I've got an arch made, 1-inch radius, and I'm just going to take a grinder. And one thing when you're grinding, you should have a welding coat on, because the sparks from the grinder are going to come back and it could easily burn your clothes. We've seen that happen a couple different times to students in the shop, so we need to make sure that you're wearing the protective clothing to do that. So I'm just going to grind this quick and show you that it doesn't take very long at all. We're just taking basically this corner off. So it literally just takes a few seconds. And we have a nice round corner, so we don't have an edge that we're going to catch on. We'll do the same thing to some of these other corners. When we're done, we'll end up rounding all these edges so you don't have a sharp corner to catch on. So now everything just simply needs to be tacked together. Like I said, once it's tacked together, we want to make sure we get it all tacked together. Every vertical upright tacked to the top. And once we get them all tacked together, then we're going to come back and we're going to weld this part of the trailer solid. And as we're welding, like I said, we're going to rotate from different areas. We'll start here, we'll go over there, we'll come back here, go there, across, do the top, do the bottom, all in different locations continuously, so we're not causing too much heat in one area. We don't want to cause the steel to start to warp or do funny things. When I was marking this out, marking these pieces out, I didn't measure anything for these rails. I just set them on, clamped it flush with my vertical here. I got a clamp on here, come over here. I want it flush here. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to trace right alongside it. And nice part about using the welder's pencil is I can get right inside that inside corner and I can mark it, and now I know where to cut it. So now I'll take this one off, I'll bring it over to the bandsaw, and we'll cut it right on the edge of that line. I don't want Then we'll come back and tack this on. Like I said, I sanded these pieces before I put them up here. You guys sanded the verticals. Before we flip it over, I'm going to sand all the cross members, get the rust off. And it doesn't take much time. It just takes a little effort to do it. But it's going to allow the paint to stick a lot better. It's going to allow the trailer to last a lot longer. Like I said, we're not trying to get down to bare metal. We just need to clean it up. And especially where we're going to weld, we need to have that especially clean. Especially if we're going to use the wire feed. That area particularly needs to be clean. And that would be the area, if you wanted to get something down to completely bare metal, that would be an area. Because your wire feed is going to weld much better to bare metal. It doesn't go through the oil coating and the rust like your stick welder does. The 7018 rod, that's a pretty nice rod. And you could weld through some little bit heavier rust. It's not as nice as the 60s series welding rods as far as welding through heavier rust, but you don't have to be quite as fussy as you have to be with the wire feed. Like I said, on this trailer, we're going to use both the wire feed and the stick welder. That way we're using both. The wire feed is going to give us a cleaner weld on our verticals. The stick welder is going to give us a stronger weld on all of our flats and horizontals and all of our fillets. So we use that wherever we can. So like I said, next we're going to go and we're just going to start tack welding everything together, and I'll start working on that. Okay, I'm just going to tack weld every vertical upright. I'm just going to put a couple tacks and everything, go around the trailer, and the next time we come back, we'll be at flipping it over. Well, when we come back, we'll weld everything solid, then we'll flip it over, and we'll start working on the hitch, the axle, and a few brackets for the wheel wells, and we'll probably even paint the bottom side while we have it upside down before we flip it back over again. So we're just going to do some tack welding, and we'll go from there. When I'm tack welding, I'm not putting a very big bead. I don't want to have a large bead there. I want to have a bead that I can run back over again and smoothen it out. But I need to have a good enough bead that's going to hold it together. Like I said, that's all we're going to do. One thing I forgot to mention, before we put this top rail on, we have the verticals going up. We needed to grind a bevel on the one edge. As we put this top rail on, this is the chunk of the top rail, this is a chunk of the vertical. As we put that on, you can see the little bit of an arch here on that inside corner. And if we put this metal in there, we can't slide it all the way up. There's a gap here once it hits. If we slide it all the way up, now we have a gap, and this is at an angle. So we need to bevel this edge, and that's what we did. We beveled that edge all the way across, so that way this 3" by 2" piece of angle iron, when it sits on there, it'll sit on there flush and tight. Because it's not much of a bevel, it was just a little bit of a bevel. And you don't have to be overly worried about how much of a bevel. you really won't do too much. You just got to make sure you do enough. So I'm just going to bevel it really quick. I don't know if you can see that little bit of a bevel. It's not much of a bevel, it's just a little bit. And I could use just a little bit more, but it's pretty close. So I have just a little bit more of a gap. Without the bevel, I've got a gap like that. With the bevel, like I said, I need to grind a little bit more. I have just a little bit of a gap. So it just needs to be ground a little bit more. So you just need to check that before you do it. That way everything fits nice and tight and you don't have any issues. Okay, I just wanted to show you how to use the bandsaw. So this is the last piece of the top rail. And you can see the mark right here. So I'm going to slide my piece. I've got the piece of angle iron. I've got a leg sitting on the one end so it's properly held up. And I'm just going to drop the blade down, line up with the mark. I'm going to keep the blade. I want the piece on the right, so I'm going to put the blade on the left side of the line, just right on that edge. And once I get it there, I'm going to take a clamp and clamp it to the fence. That way I know it can't move. And then we're ready to cut. And the bandsaw, metal cutting bandsaw, it's got a cylinder here. Turn this knob, it releases the pressure so it can lower. The bandsaw will start to lower. When the bandsaw gets cut all the way through, it's got a shut-off switch. This pin right here hits the bed of the saw, and the saw automatically shuts off. It's pretty simple to use. We're going to raise it up, make sure it's tight, start it up, glasses on, loosen that up, and just start cutting. Said once it gets through it, it automatically shuts off. You have to be careful, these pieces can be hot. One thing you should do, anytime you're cutting steel, before you measure out your piece, you should make sure that the end is square. Most of the time when you get new pieces of steel, the end has just a slight bit of an angle on it. And if you need a square piece, because it has to butt into something else, and you forget to cut it, the first end first, you might run into problems. So always remember, before you cut anything to length, cut one end, even if you're just cutting an eighth or a quarter inch off, cut enough off to make sure that you have a nice straight square edge. And then once you have that, measure from there, get your length, and you'll have a nice square cut as long as your saw is set up. Because this bandsaw, we can put an angle on it, 45 degrees either direction, so you got to make sure that that is also square with the fence. He said they're very nice to use. It makes cutting steel a whole lot simpler. Okay, I'm just going to show you what we're going to do welding the trailer when we weld everything solid. We're going to put a root pass in here. If you can look in here, you can see that we cut a 45-degree angle on our channel. We have a 3x4 quarter-inch angle iron and cut a 45-degree angles. We left a gap. It's a little over a 1/16 of an inch gap. and then we beveled both pieces. So we can lay a root bead inside of that open joint, so we can penetrate all the way through. After we weld the root bead, we'll remove the slag, and we'll weld a couple beads on either side, possibly 3 beads on there. But for surely there'll be the root bead and 2 other ones. We'll see how we do. I haven't used this welder at all. This one was sitting in the corner and it was free, so I'm gonna see, free as I mean available, I'm gonna see if it works. Like I said, I have it set at 120 for a temp, and with 1/4" steel, that's a good temperature to start at, and we'll see how it goes from there. So we're gonna weld one here, and then we'll move to another side, weld another one, but we'll see how we do. So we got a pretty decent bead in there. We're not quite level with the top. We'll come back again once we clear the slag off, and we'll weld a bead about halfway across this bead onto this. Same thing on the other side. We'll weld a bead halfway across this bead to on top of the steel, and then we'll weld another bead probably right down the center. So we're just putting this root pass in, filling in that joint. And like I said, we'll come back once we clear that slag. We aren't going to do any more welds in this area because we don't want to transfer too much heat. We'll do 1 bead, then we'll go completely somewhere else and we'll weld another bead. So we'll go to the opposite corner. We'll end up doing all 4 corners. Once we get the 4 corners done, we'll probably start in the center. On each of these cross members, I'll weld one flat over here, another one over here, and just start jumping back and forth, and then we'll move to the top, and I'll be going back and forth from the stick to the wire feed, and to try to make sure that we don't get anything too hot as to cause we don't want the frame to start to warp. So I hope that helps, and we'll see what we have for you next time. Thanks, guys.